How's it going? I'm Samson Ray Simon. I'm with Emma Scott Lavin of We Are Beloved, and also that's her YouTube channel. And that's she's also Pastor Johnson and We Need Rent Money, our upcoming film.
Right.
How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty solid. Pretty solid. I'm like a 8.3 out of 10. So it's
Awesome.
pretty good. Pretty good ratio.
Well, in
So
terms of,
first off,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, what were
Sorry
you
to
gonna
interrupt.
say? No, yeah, you
Well,
whatever you.
I was going to make a little crack, and I was going to say, in the role of Pastor Johnson, um, I did have a dream last night where Jesus Christ came to me and told me that he wanted to be referred to in they them pronouns.
Nice, nice.
Yeah. So
Makes sense.
that's apparently why it's taken him 2,000 years to get back to us, because he had to figure out some identity issues.
You know, you gotta work those things out. It's the IT department. You know.
Exactly. So it's a bit of a deal.
uh, yeah, right on. So, I wanted to ask you first off, just vaguely, like, what performances, like performance arts, are you all involved in? Because you're involved in a lot of different art forms. I just wanted to get a vague rundown of all the different stuff that you're into.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, totally. So, yeah, it's one of the hardest questions for me. I mean, probably the worst question anybody could ask me, is what do you do? and it's just been that question's been the bane of my existence. So I'll say generally that I think in the last year or so I've really had this kind of epiphany where I realized that video production, creating YouTube videos, is really a perfect hub for me, because I do so many different things, and I just tend to be a very experimental kind of mind. Um, and so, I'm a philosopher. I'm sort of this political thinker. I'm sort of the social systems theorist person. I'm, in the last 2 years, I've realized I'm transgender, and there's all that I want to share and express, and and inspire people, invite people to really recognize that it's safe for them to be themselves. I don't know if it's necessarily safe, but it's not safe in the world,
Should
but
be,
safe.
should be.
It, yeah, it's like we're aiming toward creating a world where it's safe, for everybody to truly be themselves. So I have all this like social philosophy, systems thinking, systems theory, all that kind of stuff going on. But then on the other end, I'm obviously sort of this like alien drag queen. Today I'm kind of doing this homage to Juno Birch, and I mean it's just like this is who I am, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm also a dancer. I'm not a professional dancer. I guess it depends on what you call it. I'm not professionally trained, I should say. But
You're an
having done 8 years,
autodidact, you would say.
yeah, I'm an autodidact. I mean, I had a stint where I taught myself JavaScript and wrote 2 applications. Spent
Hmm.
2,000 hours teaching myself JavaScript. So all of these things sort of converge into this amazing ability to produce. When you produce a video, all of that comes together. There's sort of like the performance aspect, the artist aspect, and then there's sort of like the sitting on the computer doing the editing. You know, and there's even
Mm.
opportunities to code. Of course, there's opportunities to just like be my weird queen self. So that's where it's all sort of really come together for me. And I should mention also YouTube, of course, is this opportunity to really, um, you know, become visible as a thinker and as a philosopher, because there's so much more for me than simply dressing up. Simply, there's a message, and there's also
Sure.
there's an inquiry, like I'm constantly refining my thinking. I'm finally constantly challenging my thinking and having my thinking challenged, and even processing sort of like, at some level, like, if you ask what do I do, I'm sort of this spiritual seeker or something. I'm always sort of like, you know, seeker of truth or something like that, which gets
Yeah.
into that philosophical aspect. And it's like, you know, uh, you know, will I believe 10 years from now what I necessarily believe today, or even 5 years from now? Probably not. And then in some ways it'll refine, I'll get more discerned. Other ways it might be like, wow, I was wrong there. And so, the
Well, it
YouTube
happens to me all the
format.
time.
Yeah, and that YouTube format, really creates an opportunity to explore those ideas and participate in a conversation with other people. So yeah, that's where it's all happening for me now.
100%. So let's examine that a little bit closer. Let's go into the YouTube channel that you have. It's called We Are
Uh-huh.
Beloved, and
Yeah, that's right.
so we are, and then beloved is spelled BEL. Okay, OV, and then there's a 3 and then a D,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
that's right.
So that's where you go into your philosophy dives and also
Uh-huh.
into kind of your greater examination of self and how self relates to society as a whole
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
times, really.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
very much so.
would you
Yeah.
say that that would be the most ideal platform that you've had so far to release your works?
I believe so. Yes. I've found that YouTube is great, in the sense that I think in a lot of ways my whole life, I've really struggled to find a place, a platform to really have a conversation. Like to really start an idea, express an idea, um, and frame an idea, and then share it with the world in such a way that I could actually get feedback on it and initiate a
Yeah,
conversation. Um, and so yeah, I've been really I think if you talked to me 3 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago or even not so long ago, you would have seen a lot of anger and frustration. Not that I still don't get angry and frustrated, but that I was sort of I feel like a lot of my life, I've sort of been waiting for somebody to be like, hey, here's your moment, here's the microphone. And then there's sort of this other side of like, okay, here's the microphone. And it's like, what do I say? What am I trying to say? It's like I
mm,
finally get this moment and it's like, oh, oops, choke, collapse, fall apart, right? Um,
mm,
and YouTube has really been this opportunity for me to, it's like I can frame it any way I want. And of
mm-hmm.
course, that's also the dark side of YouTube, is that you can frame it any way you want. So you know, you can go off on some tangent, kind of get lost, but it's all on you, right? So
Mm,
it's been
yeah,
an interesting experience.
the reason why I'm partial to it and I'm really a big fan of the opportunity that it's given a lot of people as a platform is because you can go through this chrysalis period and like kind of like refine everything that you're trying to do. And if you're a person that does multiple things, especially if you're an editor,
Hmm.
you can take time and really chop it up and make it so that it's a finite, like this is exactly what I'm trying to say, so that
Yeah.
you get nothing twisted up about
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
It almost makes it
Yeah.
superior to a platform like this where we're having an interview because it's like you're answering a question kind of on the spot, which is
Right.
which is difficult, but I hope in some way this shines a light on that, you know.
Very much
Um,
so. Yeah. I very much see that doing interviews is really, I'm trying to gain practice in terms of like, I have this grand vision of being this great big, public figure, and whether that actually happens or not, who knows, but every opportunity to be in front of the camera and to sort of be in different situations in front of the camera, like when I'm making a YouTube video, obviously it's not live, it's something that I pre-record and cut up and edit, reshoot it. Whereas this, yeah, the moment of being on the spot, having to kind of think on my feet, I think creates a different, it's just sort of a different avenue to practice and explore. So I think it's really, really valuable, in that sense. And then there's also sort of the other side of that, the fear of, uh, in the interview context, I think there's the fear of like, whoops, oops, I just said something really, did I just say something really racist? Did that mean, like that sort of thing?
that's
And
that. Oh, that reminds me of stand-up comedy. You're like,
whoops, yeah, I actually have a great story about that, which I have to say I'm really grateful it happened when it did, because I was doing a performance that we have a local gay bar in town here, which of course right now is closed because of COVID and the whole thing. But
Yeah, naturally.
it's really been it's been quite an amazing venue to explore, to try on being a drag queen, try on being a comedian, a poet, just to really go there and have an audience and, a friendly audience. And, there's some really amazing people performing out of there. And I had the opportunity, there was one Sunday I went to a poetry slam, and, I have this doc that has all my, it's almost 300 pages long now. And it's like, just sort of like the essays that are in development, that are not finished, and, they become kind of, it's just sort of my noodling document, and I go in there periodically, and it's like I have this philosophical argument. It's like I get some new insight, add that and reframe, and eventually things kind of become ready to germinate, become videos or essays or become. So there was this one night, I went to this poetry reading, and I was like, just kind of trying to feel the room and feel the vibe, and I was going through this doc, and I didn't have anything really, that I had planned to go out with that night. So I just was like, let's go through the talking, this talking points doc. And I had this sort of like half framed, half finished idea, which I had dropped in there from, it had been the result, it had grown out of an experience I'd had about a month before. And, I think I'd had the intention to go back into it. Anyway, so this night I was like, hey, why don't I read this one? And so I went up to the mic, and I described this experience that I think transgender women can generally relate to, which is this idea of the male gaze, or the male stare. And it's oftentimes this really uncomfortable gaze. I've never received this, at least in my awareness, conscious awareness, from a woman, a cisgendered woman, or any kind of, woman. It's always seemed to be something that's come from males. And so I related this one experience where it was very uncomfortable. This man was staring at me with this, I couldn't tell what the energy was, but it didn't seem very nice across, from this parking lot. And in this process, of describing this experience, in the sort of prose poem half finished thing at the mic, there I was. I described this man's body, and I put him, I don't want to describe exactly what I had said that night. It's not really, it shouldn't have even really been in the piece, to be honest, but it was there.
We grow, we learn,
And what I realized is I could hear, like, you can, when you're at the mic, you can feel the energy of the room, and you can feel the energy shift. At least I can. And something happened in the room as I was reading this piece, and it didn't feel good. I was like, uh-oh, like I just knew something was off. And afterward, the MC gets up, and she, gives this whole speech about, we accept everybody and the whole thing. And I was like, what was that? And it just kind of hit me like a train. And I had basically fat shamed the entire audience.
Like it was like in the sense of you trying to explain your situation from your perspective, you had unfortunately like cut off a body positivity type.
It was bad. I mean, it was just, I felt so horrible. I mean, I was literally having these feelings in my body the rest of that night. I just felt so awful, because it was like the opposite of what I was trying to express. It was the opposite of what I was trying to communicate. It was like clearly like there were people in the audience who like fit this description, and I had just described them and put them in this class of people who give this horrible stare to trans women. And, it just was like, and thankfully the MC came up, when I went and talked to the MC afterward, and the MC was like, I get your intention wasn't that. And then they literally said, if your intention had been that, I would have walked you out of this club.
You can feel that, right? It's just, yeah.
It was like, and so it was just this real, eye-opening moment of, and once like, and I have support people that I can reach out to, have a community of people that I can reach out to as support. And I just, made a couple of phone calls that night. And I was like, this just happened. And I just feel absolutely horrible. And people kind of, the people that I talked to did bring me down off the ledge and say, we all make mistakes. And, clearly your intention was something else, and you just, you should have edited, you should have edited this piece down a little bit before you went up to the mic with it.
It's one of those experiences. Unfortunately, like another thing that happens sometimes is that you'll do something and then it's like right for the time, and then later on you'll examine it and you'll be like, I can't watch this movie anymore or whatever. I can't listen to this stand-up anymore because like, even though that was legit, like funny back then, even if it was a joke about me, even if I was doing some stand-up about me, or I was doing a joke about me that I wrote in a movie or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years later, you'd be like, wow, that was kind of demonstrative and inappropriate, or you know what I mean? And
totally.
That's not really a bad thing though. What that means is that now, if you're a person that's like, I have no remorse whatsoever, and I don't really give a fuck what anybody thinks or whatever, and I'm just gonna try to be edgy just for the sake of being edgy, like that's lazy, Yeah. And it's like, feeling bad is not a bad thing, if that makes sense, because it's like it means that you're trying to grow and you're trying to be better.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a person that is just like, I'm gonna just I'm gonna try to push people's buttons, and it's like, I'd rather watch Gallagher, honestly. I'd rather watch somebody smash a watermelon with a hammer than
right.
One of those.
Yeah, well, it was quite the learning experience, because it really taught me, you do have to be careful. It's, I don't know if careful is the right word, but there is a, just going off the cuff. I mean, I what I witnessed was out of that experience, it was months ago, so it's kind of coming back to me as I'm talking about it. Was I witnessed my own, here I was talking about this person who, seemed to have some sort of thing about trans women that wasn't nice, that seemed to represent a judgment that I seem to get fairly often, and what I got to see that night was my own prejudice, my own judgment, that I am doing the same thing to other people, that fat shaming, I was invalidating, I was essentially equating being fat with, being wrong. And and it was this unconscious thing that I had never, where did that come from? I mean, I can go back to, junior high school, where my father would say things, and there were fat jokes going on, all the time. I mean, your mama's so fat, and I mean, just all that
shit. I know all about that shit.
Right. So it's like, and this was, I grew up in the 80s. I mean, I know for a lot of people, like here I am going out as this YouTuber. It's like, yeah, I'm old, I'm not a boomer, but I might as well be for a lot of the people that are going to watch this.
Well, you're Gen X, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm X. So I went to school in the 80s, and it was, it just was normal to that, and it doesn't make it okay. Like it was not right, but it was normal to shame people all the time for body qualities, for sexual orientation, for gender identity, everything. I mean, there wasn't even I mean, it just gets into such a complex conversation here, and it's so timely, of course, given what's going on right now in the world.
I know it's intense. I mean, like I could say, like, as a black male, like, you're not black enough, you're too black, you're whatever, like there's all these different, like, you know what I mean? And it's like, now that it's so weird to me, because like now that we have Twitter and everybody can voice their opinion, people are like, I don't know why everybody's so sensitive, everybody's so up in arms about everything. It's like, no. What it was is that everybody was upset before, they just didn't have a voice. And now you
Right.
have to hear everybody. Now you're forced to hear everybody, and you don't like
Right.
the feedback you're getting. That's what the fuck is actually really going on. And it's like,
Right.
you know, and it's like
Yeah.
we're becoming a better society rapidly because of it. And you are like the Van Gogh painting or whatever it was, where the guy's like, and it's like, either go with the flow or just like step out the conversation until like certain things get worked out. I don't have a problem with
Yeah.
it's like this last week has been really eye-opening for me. Not
Hmm.
because of the people that have had my back, as far as like civil rights and everything like that, but like not as the people that were like silent, but the people that come out that are like obviously in opposition. Like, well,
Uh-huh.
that's too far. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? If everybody writes, it's like, yeah,
Excuse me.
crazy. Like that
Right.
it's even taken us this far. It's like,
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but I do see a need at some point to do a video on like arguments for the equality of human beings. It's like really, do we need to be talking about this right now? But apparently we do.
why?
You know, it,
Oh,
it,
why
it's
are we doing this?
it's like I mean it just and I'll just if I guess I'll just sort of jump into like because we wanted to talk a little bit about the COVID Utopia series and
Oh yeah,
I
yeah. Let's go into that.
yeah. So I have kind of a segue into that, which is this, you know, this video series is this total crazy experiment, right? I mean, it's like taking over my apartment. I have like this 400 square foot apartment, and like, literally, like I've got this thing that represents, it's this, I'm literally out of like duct tape and like colored duct tape and this long strip of paper, and I made this really intricate kind of like pattern thing that represents different timelines, and then and I'm sort of asking this question of what timeline are we in? What timeline am I in? Like did I end up in a utopian or a dystopian? And I'm working on,
Real,
well,
some real
I guess
quantum
I'll just,
shit.
what's that?
I said that's some real
It's it's
quantum shit.
it's quantum, and it's also this sort of I'm going to want to allow viewers to sort of I don't want to give away too much here, but essentially the essence is there's sort of there's this moment of shock that we all experienced, the emergence of this new virus, right? And
Yeah.
there's the immediate shock of like the danger to all of us, right? The immediate health crisis, and then there's this clear, like, at least for some period of time, we chose to, this is the first time I've ever seen this in my lifetime, we've actually chosen as a society to prioritize something other than the economy. At least we did for a while. I mean, it seems to not be so much now when people are, doing what they're doing. But for that first month or two, there was just this recognition, like we just completely borked the economy. And and this being a society in America, where the economy comes first. I mean, it really, like, when it comes down to it, the politicians seem to be, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, it's just, if you're a mainstream politician, it seems to be, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, I don't know, but it seems to be, the economy comes first, and the economy is measured, by how well is the stock market doing and what are the employment numbers, and neither of those numbers are really a good measure of like how the quality of life in America,
Yeah.
and yet here we are, we're making this choice that, in this moment of collective shock, and there was sort of this moment where, at least from where I was sitting, here you've got this, the most right-wing president in living memory, probably since the Civil War, or before the Civil War, honestly.
At least Polk. At least Polk.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the most right-wing president in our living memory.
Yeah,
And
for sure. 100%.
and a Congress that, I mean, you have the Democrats now in control of the House, but you still have this, very, very right-wing caucus and essentially in control in the Senate. And here they are passing these bills after the COVID, situation emerges, that like the left has been talking about, like we should be doing this, for the last 20 years. Like these are things that have been on the left wing agenda. The left. I hate to use these terms, but this sort
in
of
comparison
yeah,
between, yeah.
this
Because
empathic.
the French would be like, it's not really left, ha 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 ha.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Right. Well, I tend to describe myself, and again, I'm going to get in trouble for this when I have tons of subscribers a year from now, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" But I don't necessarily identify myself as like a socialist or a, I definitely have opinions about capitalism and how capitalism is working now, and but I don't necessarily identify as an ist in the sense I'm realizing more and more about myself that what I really am is an empath, and I would venture that that's probably true of a lot of people who identify as socialist or communist or even variants of capitalism where it's uh, people who want to bring in universal basic income, which is something that like seems to make sense to me. It's like maybe capitalism wouldn't be so bad if there was not, capitalism actually might be kind of fun if it was something that we experienced having a choice to participate in. So, that's where the, these ideas like universal basic income. Well, here we are, with this, this right wing, Congress passing these bills and, clearly hitting a ceiling where they're like, we're not going to go past this, but, willing to, when it comes to like, oh my God, we're going to see, if we don't do this, we're going to have a situation where, the very meaning of our power begins to collapse because the institutions themselves, structure of society, will break down. If you have 60% of the population in the street or something, right?
I would say we're at that point.
We're getting there. We're getting there quick. I mean, so so that's that's kind of this angle that I'm exploring with COVID Utopia was trying to get at sort of these metrics, of like, if there is this momentous shock, and it's a very specific kind of shock because it's not a shock that like, like if it was like if we got invaded by some other country, let's say, or attacked by some other country, or if there was an uprising that was very specifically a certain class of people or race of people or something, right? It'd be very easy to say it's them and go us them, right? Them bad, we need to suppress, and that's probably how the people on the right would generally react, right?
That's how politics works, is polarizing.
Exactly. So, but with the COVID situation, it's like this is not something that we can like say, oh, this was a specific. I mean, I know I'm not going to mention his name. Trying to do the whole thing with calling it Chinese and whatever.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think it's important what you said, by the way. Let me. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's important what you just did right there because I don't want to mention the name anymore. Because because if you're a megalomaniac and you want your name mentioned every 3 seconds and like it gives them some kind of ungodly, weird, like demonic power almost. I don't know. It's weird, and it's like the only way you can really, the less you talk about it, the less power it has.
Right.
Regardless whether it is positive or negative, it doesn't matter. It doesn't just, hey.
Right. And I'll say myself, it's like I want my name mentioned every 3 seconds, but I hope, I want to believe that in having my name mentioned every 3 seconds, I'm having a positive impact. You know what I mean? It's like I have that. I have that in me too. Like
you don't want to be shitty with it though. That's the difference.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like if I have this desire to be famous, and I've spent my whole life getting shamed for that, and before I knew I was trans, it was like, why do I keep saying I want to be famous and I can't even get in front of a camera? Well, now, we've sort of broken through that. And now I'm starting to see my own, like, even the word narcissism, I think it's devolved into it's just become another ad hominem attack, unfortunately, in this country. But the use of that, what that idea of narcissism sort of refers to, of like, yeah, it's all about me. Like I have that. I definitely have it. But I
Who
guess
doesn't?
I'm conscious enough. I hope I'm conscious enough to be like, well, and this kind of comes down to the 12-step work. There's this passage in Big Book of AA, which I don't do
Gotcha.
AA, but I do other stuff, other A
I follow.
stuff. And there's this passage in there that's pretty awesome that talks about, we come to this realization as we're going through this process of going through the steps that, it wasn't our will, like our willfulness, our need, that was actually problematic. It was never bad. It's that, we were using that will to try to meet needs in an unconscious way, essentially. And that's where it was destructive. But if we essentially take that will and we apply it, we put it in service of something essentially that's, the higher power, as they call it, right? Which I'm
Can
I'm
mean
not
anything.
religious, in the traditional
Yeah, it
sense.
could mean the ocean or whatever.
Right. We put that in service of something greater. Well, all of a sudden now that same willfulness becomes an asset instead of a liability. So that's my some of the spiritual journey. Anyway, kind of bringing it back to this whole COVID utopia thing, and the segue that I was gonna mention was like, in the midst of all this, I'm making these. I start making these videos as my way of like just kind of processing. This was like a pretty big departure, this COVID Utopia series from like what I was already doing on YouTube in a sense, because I was like, plan was like, I'm going to make more, video essays in this sort of format that I've been making them. And then there was just this thing that came to me, and I'm trying to process, and it's totally nonlinear. And, I have always had this thing about alternative timelines and alternate history. Let's play with this notion. And so there's sort of these different timelines that all branch off the emergence of COVID, and the most, apparently utopian one is essentially the shock. The collective shock is so great that everybody essentially loses their ego, and for long enough that we realize that we collectively have power. People who have power, who are in the positions of power, step down from their egos, and those of us who are, usually in the victim role or in the receiving end or whatever it is, we all sort of lose our egos. And when there's that us-them division, when that actually disappears, what's left is there's just one big collective we. And if we're working in concert, like, we can pivot society in essentially any direction we want. We actually have all the time in the world, and and we're left with this choice, essentially, right? We're conscious of a moment of choice. And then the most dystopian, on the other extreme end is the opposite, where it's like essentially the people in power, like the people who are not, people who are, under, in the receiving end of power, I guess you might say, raise their hand and go, hey, this situation, and the people in power go, hey, and there's sort of this, like, we don't care dynamic, which then leads to apathy, leads to breakdown, leads to people in the streets rioting,
It's
things burning down,
it's crazy because it's both, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
right? Because ultimately, like, you have on one side what you mentioned first as like a utopian, like, everybody does realize now that we can work collectively together. Like, that is undeniable. Like,
Yeah.
that is, it is also undeniable that what is more important is the greater good of the whole, which most people care about. However,
Right.
at the same time as that's happening, you have a elite class of people that have had the wealth that are swallowing up more wealth during this
Right.
period of economic collapse because they have less and less. They're given these huge cash bailouts and all this stuff, and then they're like, okay, well, you can't buy your own stocks back, but that doesn't stop them from absorbing smaller companies, and now you're going to have these huge multi-conglomerate companies, these monopolies, after we get out of this whole thing, and people are going to be like, where did my bar go? You know, where did my favorite club go? Now it's everything's at McDonald's and everything's at, you know what I mean? And it's everything's at Buster's Wild Wings. You know, so it's like,
that's exactly, you know, it's like both scenarios are happening, and it's like, where do we focus? And, you know, part of the struggle of making this video series is like, you know, wow, I can't identify which, you know, it's like, what timeline am I in? I don't know. It's just, it's too big, too much going on, you know, but let's try to get at the source of, you know, where the decision point is. And then, you know, framing that whole question, you know, I finally, I feel like in the last video, which just got released today, I finally kind of like get to where I actually frame the question. Now that video was the video that I just released on YouTube today, was actually released on May 21st on Instagram. So everything started on Instagram, and then the video started getting longer and more complex, and I'm like, this needs to go to YouTube. So I just released it on YouTube, and it's you know, it's a weird place to be, because, you know, I thought, you know, we're going to be just dealing with this COVID situation for a while. And then all of a sudden, 4 days after I released that video, you know, there's the murder of George Floyd. And it's like, now we've got this, like, we don't even really, like, we've got two situations that are demanding our attention. And we have the distraction machine trying to, you know, so there's this next video in the series, essentially, which is not, I'm just going to say, this is not the video that I was intending to make, right?
Yeah.
But then George Floyd happened, and I was like, I can't make the video I was planning and, you know, be sensitive to the room now, where things are at now. And so, you know, I'm hoping to get this video out by Saturday. I don't know if I'm going to pull it off, you know. But suffice to say that it goes a little bit darker. You know, the COVID utopia thing that I've been doing, you know, with this character, and, you know, it's obviously dealing with these pretty intense issues, very intense issues. But the look and feel is very, you know, I'm sort of this clownish, you know, queen character, you know, and
it's bright, it's
with
flashy,
this one,
you would say.
It's flashy. You know, this next piece is in a sense even more so, but there's this undeniable, like, how do I even, you know, like, I'm posing this question, utopian, dystopian, and then it's like, now we have a situation where there was an actual, you know, not like there wasn't injustice before, but now it's like front and center. You know, this guy got murdered by a police officer in broad daylight with people taking video, you know, with an absolute disregard for human life, you know, disregard for, you know, it just was, he was so blind to what he was doing, and so callous. I mean, just, and his partners were callous. I mean, so my experience of, like, in making this next video was, you know, I need to actually get the footage of the video of George Floyd, you know, and I'm not showing the video, but I'm using parts of the audio. So I went into, you know, it's like a 10-minute video, you know, and so I took out the video part, but I'm using the audio. And in editing the audio, I wanted to kind of get the key moments of it down to like a couple of minutes to fit the sequence. And, you know, there was a Saturday, I think it was last Saturday, I was sitting here in my apartment editing this thing. And I just was, you know, listening to the voices and hearing the different interactions, you know, what people were saying, and, you know, what the bystanders were saying, what the cops were saying.
It's important.
And it was, I was on the edge of tears for most of the day, you know, and I think the next day I felt kind of like crap, and there was probably a lot of that was just me processing, like, you know, this is, I mean, there's just so many dimensions of this is just so effed up on so many levels. And, you know, so I almost, you know, there's part of me that's like, you know, should I do this as part of the COVID utopia thing? Because it's like, it's just it's so raw, it's so in your face, and part of what I've been struggling with a little bit with this channel is, I've been doing, kind of intentionally a little bit of in your face, where it's like, here are the mass psychological patterns that, that are going on that are causing blah, blah, blah to happen. Whether
It's
you
a
know,
full
the exclu-
examination.
yeah, close examination and close, self-examination. And also, sometimes, really calling out society and being like, you guys, America, you know, and then there's sort of this moment where like, I know, things are so overwhelming, and I, one of the things that I see is really, part of why things have been allowed to get to the point that they have in our society is because of essentially rationalization. We as humans just naturally have, a coping mechanism of rationalization where we explain things away. You know,
Yeah.
um, so if you went to Nazi Germany in the 1940s, there were probably lots of people who didn't agree with what was going on, suspected that people were disappearing and being taken places. They suspected all this was happening, but they explained it away so that they could live with themselves and go about their day and function.
It's about convenience. It's about
Yeah,
convenience.
yeah, and it's not, it's not necessarily, it creates these monstrous, or it allows for really monstrous things to happen in society. But it's not really, at some level, it's just a coping mechanism that we each, we all have it as humans.
Or
And
you
there's
break
actually,
down. You
yeah,
break
exactly.
down.
You just, yeah, I mean, unless you have, a really, really intentional, maybe meditation practice, or, you've really developed, you've really done a lot of practice, I would say, in some sort of, whether it's a meditation tradition or a personal growth modality, or maybe therapy, or, something, or philosophy, where you've really done a lot of work to recognize how you respond. 12-step recovery is a way, right? I mean, that for me, that plus meditation plus, a smattering of Buddhism and yoga, but so like, I've really come to cherish this ability to kind of sit with the absurdity, to sit with the experience of injustice, to sit with the grief, and even as much practice as I've had, and I don't consider myself any kind of like master, right? But,
Yeah.
I probably have some, level of skill, and it's like, just to go about my day. I mean, there are times where it's like, yeah, this is so painful. It's so terrifying. It's so depressing. Just being an empathic person and witnessing what goes on is, it's just overwhelming. And so people, there's some degree to which, like, if you don't have that training, if you don't have that background, if you just like went to school and got trained in being a worker, which is what they train people to do,
And that's what it is, right?
yeah, and you don't get the experience, you don't really see or experience the value of sitting with your existential crises,
Oh.
and sitting with the absurdity of the universe. Like, if you don't get that there's cheese at the end of that tunnel, you're not going to go down that tunnel. You're going to shut down.
I feel like I have an existential crisis every week now.
Yeah.
It's just like, which is insane.
Yeah.
And a lot of people tell me just like, hey, just don't think about it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't. I can't.
Right.
I can't.
Exactly. And
I don't have that.
Yeah.
I don't have that. What do you call it? I don't have that ability.
Right.
I wish I did.
Yeah. Well, it's probably serving you. I was going to mention there's a book that I read. I believe it's called First Rate Madness, and I'm not recalling the name of the author right now. But the book is called The First Rate Madness, and the author basically cites these different studies. I believe he was a psychiatrist. And so, some people, take issue with the psychiatric model, and sometimes I wonder about it. But in the essence of what he's saying is that in moments of crisis, so most of the time you have psychologically normal people, like when things are relatively stable in society. Um, when there's general prosperity, when things are generally working, you have leadership that tends to be psychologically normal. And what he describes as psychologically normal is not what we necessarily think. He's talking essentially about average. And the average person, has these coping mechanisms of rationalization. And so that's how the average person can function. It's like, there's all this horrible stuff going on around me, but, hey, let's go get a beer, and that's kind of a standard, there's all this horrible stuff, but so he describes in moments of crisis, in moments of stability, you kind of want that kind of leadership because there's really, you just need somebody to kind of make sure the ship is going generally in the direction you want it to go and make little adjustments here and there and kind of keep things running, administrators, that's fine. They don't have to be brilliant. They can just function.
Yeah. Obama.
But yeah, I guess Obama, but he even describes very specifically, said George W. Bush, George W. Bush, according to his estimation, was actually relatively, we all kind of have this idea that George W. Bush is stupid, but actually George W. Bush, supposedly is tested like 120 IQ, which is like kind of on the low end of presidents. Like most of the presidents are between like 120 and 130. So he's kind of on the low end, but he's not stupid. He's above average. He's like significantly above the average person.
You can look at a conversation that he has with another official or with another leader, another world leader, and go, okay, I know somebody that's dumber than that, and I know somebody that's smarter than that.
Right.
Easily.
Right. But he's kind of average, like, and that's what, why the leadership even kind of
I see what you're saying.
And put him, because he was a guy that you could hang out with and have a beer with. He wasn't, this like, radical explosive thinker. He didn't get depressed. He wasn't manic depressive. So in this book, the author describes also, he says, but in moments of crisis, so in moments of general normality, you want that kind of leadership. In moments of crisis, people who would generally be considered mentally abnormal, fringe, right? So people who are depressive. So he goes into that. Martin Luther King was depressive. Gandhi was depressive. I believe Kennedy was, I can't remember if you said John F. Kennedy was.
Malcolm X was very explosive and angry.
Yeah.
But it made sense.
Right.
Made sense.
Exactly. FDR.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
FDR was it Theodore Roosevelt or Franklin? I can't remember which one he said, but the guy he was manic and would just talk your ear off and nobody could even get a word in edgewise. And it was clearly.
Yeah, he was
manic.
wild. I know which one you're talking about. With the glasses. The one with the Teddy.
Yeah,
right?
It was Teddy.
Panama Canal. He was wild.
Exactly. And Lincoln, same story. Lincoln was extremely depressive. Struggled with depression his entire life. And Churchill. And so a lot of these guys, up until their sort of moment, when they were sort of thrust into the public spotlight. Prior to that, people would have said loser, or tied them up and put them in an asylum or something.
Yeah, put them in a straitjacket and throw them in a bouncy room.
So bringing it back to the depression part, what this guy says essentially that studies seem to demonstrate is that people who are depressive actually have a more accurate sense of the odds than the odds of their own survival or success than normal people. Normal people have so much rationalization, and that's how they function in society. So they're able to talk themselves into happiness and talk themselves into success, even though they don't really have much, they don't really have the odds that they think they do. And in stable times, they're able to do better. And everybody kind of traffics in rationalization. It's like, like your friend saying, don't think about it. Hey man, just come on over here, have a beer. Right. So it's like, it's a lot easier to get along with other people if play the game of rationalization just like everybody else does, because that's kind of the normal thing. The depressed guy is going to be sitting over there, or the manic person, is going to be sitting over here, and like they're going to be alone, they're going to be isolated, nobody wants to be with them, right? But in that moment of crisis, that's the person who actually sees reality for what it is. And so, in that need to move, they'll be the ones who come up with creative solutions. So kind of bringing it back to where I'm, what I'm, I sort of got off on like multiple tangents here, so
no, that was brilliant. I'm down with that. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So I think, I think what I was trying to bring it back to was the idea of this facing the reality of what is COVID laying before us, and what is now, this George Floyd situation. If it had happened and there'd been no COVID, it probably still would have been explosive, but now it's 10 times, because everybody's already on edge, already feeling unstable. And then it's like, really, this happens, right? So we've certainly entered this time when it's like, that rationalization is no longer serving us. It's like, if we rationalize away what's happening now, we're liable to end up in a police state, or, in some kind of really dystopian situation. And so how do we, that's where that leadership, that we're at a level now where it's like, we need insane people essentially to lead us.
Oh, fuck. Well, I hate to take it, use this as some kind of like capitalistic opportunity to bring it back to the film, but
yeah, sure.
There are themes in this film that are very much examining these subjects that we are going through at such a high propensity that I think it's going to be hard for people to laugh at certain parts that would normally be funny in the film. Even the very concept is like, the system has failed these individuals, and they have to resort to extreme measures in order to make rent,
right?
And it's like, whose landlord is not an asshole right now, right?
Right,
and it's
exactly.
Like, and then you have like, there's a little piece in there of police brutality, and like there's a piece in there of like, the police's wanton attitude towards like completely disrespecting and brushing people off that are the people that are supposed to serve. You have, aside from the actual physical crisis of COVID-19, like really we touch on what happens when capitalism breaks down in the film.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about your role in the film. You play a pastor, right?
Yeah.
And in that sequence, right? It's about insurance. The guys are trying to sell you insurance. They're trying to sell, and it's like, it's a fear-based system, right? So they're like, you need this thing, otherwise, and it's like, that is that. I think it shines a light on capitalism in such a way that is like, do we need most of these things? How do you feel?
Right.
How do you feel about it?
That's a great question. I do feel that I think insurance was originally, and don't quote me on this, I know that I like to cite sources and stuff, right? But my sense of just sort of logical inference, there was a time when insurance was actually an innovation that served us, because the reason we came up with insurance, my understanding is the first insurance companies were actually kind of co-ops, right? What happened was, like, you would have, let's say, a car accident, right? And before there was insurance, I mean, if you got smashed up in a car accident and the other person got smashed up in a car accident, somebody ended up with some ginormous hospital bill, right? And your car is now smashed up, and the other person's car is now smashed up, and you're making some crappy wage, and the other person's making some crappy wage. Well, you just basically screwed, everybody's now screwed, right?
Hmm.
So the idea of insurance was like basically a response to this sort of capitalistic edge of being unable to, being put in a position where you are now indebted to a point where you can never pay it back, right? And
Hmm.
you're essentially tethered to some horrible, circumstance, right? I mean, so that was the idea, I think, of insurance initially. It was like, wow, this is a way that we can pool our resources and work together such that we distribute the risk, you know?
Right.
Um,
That's why
right.
your
So,
character in the movie seems so receptive to hearing it out, because you're like, okay,
right.
let's see,
Yeah,
right?
we're all in this pool together. All of us have potential medical expenses. All of us have potential. All of us who are driving cars. We're taking on a certain level of risk, and most of the time we're fine. The average person gets along and they're doing just fine. But that thing happens and it finishes you. You're done. Like it's a defining moment in your life. Puts you in the poorhouse. Done. Or you
Hmm.
can't get the medical and now you can't walk. Because you weren't able to get the health care or whatever it was. So
Mm-mm.
let's get together. Let's pool our resources and distribute the risk so that if this happens to anybody in the pool, the impact on you is far less, right? Um,
That's the
but
idea.
just like yeah, but just like everything, I think one of the theories that I have is sort of there's a moment when um, and again, this might be a moment I get in trouble for, because I have absolutely no Native American blood in me at all. But there's this notion of, I've been around enough sort of Native American, spiritual, whether it's white people pretending and, using all their ideas or actual Native American, spiritual events and things like, I've been
Or
around that enough
tribal, yeah.
to get this idea of there seemed to be, maybe it was a Lakota tradition, I'm not really sure where it originated, but the idea of the hoop. The hoop is like the circle of people when everybody holds hands, or everybody, from Lakota would have their summer gathering, and there might be 50,000 people, and I'm completely making up the number, but they would do their summer gathering, and you'd have all the tribes, all the camps come together. And, if you had a circle of 50,000 people, I mean, that's a huge circle of people, but you could basically look across the hoop and see the other person. They might look like a dot, but you'd essentially see everybody there, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so there would be this sort of sense of this extended connection between all these people. But there's a point when, like, what happens when the hoop becomes so huge that you can't see the other person way at the other end? Like, you now have 350, like whatever it is in the United States now, 360 million people, and if all of those people were to hold hands and form a big circle, it would be so vast, it would be probably the furthest person on the other end of the hoop from you would be thousands of miles away, or maybe hundreds. I don't know, but it would be so far that you wouldn't be able to see. And so there starts to be this level of anonymity where I think that's sort of the moment when bad actors start to see opportunity, because they're like, oh, nobody, I'm anonymous. Nobody's going to catch me. So I can start playing games with the system. I can start gaming things to my own advantage.
Hmm.
And I think it's not necessarily such a bad thing if you just have a huge population. I think it's feasible that we could maybe have a society where there's still enough collective trust and there's still enough collective faith in sort of the worldview of the society. It basically works well enough that, like, you're always going to have those people like who are opportunists, but I think if we had a healthy society, yeah, it would be possible you catch them really fast and kind of like, strip away whatever power that they might have abused fairly quickly. But when you have a society where there's already a very, very low level of trust, and you also have this really,
Mm.
the society is also really huge, then there's sort of that moment of like, you know, I'm just going to do this and nobody's going to catch me and fuck them. And that moment of fuck them is I
Yeah.
think what we keep seeing in, for instance, the insurance companies. It's just one example. The insurance company no
Yeah, yeah.
longer has any accountability to its,
And you're
you know,
and
your
you're and you have to do it. You
yeah,
have to have it.
it's now legally required for you to do this, and and we have absolutely no accountability. The only thing that generates some level of accountability is like, well, there's 10 different insurance companies, so I'm going to go to the one that has the best service. But you
Okay,
still don't
that's
really use it.
capitalism trying to take care of its own market, right?
Yeah,
But they can get together and decide to fuck us all over collectively.
yeah. I mean, they can, or they can, take all the money that they've accumulated and basically buy congressmen.
Oh, okay,
And
yeah,
that,
I
and
was about to go into that too. Yeah.
right. So that's where we're at today. So it's like, there's just this low level of trust, and it keeps declining because everybody's, it just, like you hear it all the time. It's like, everybody's out for themselves. So you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to be out for myself too. I don't like it. Nobody likes it. Maybe a few people out there do because they're sadists, but most people don't. But it's sort of like, for
Yeah, no,
the
I feel
vast.
you. I'm with you on that. Most people do not want to be like, I'm a dick or whatever, because it's
Yeah,
antithetical. Like it's like
yeah,
opposite of most people's belief system.
right,
They think that they have to in order to even survive. That's
right. But we also rationalize that too. It's like, well, I'm good to my children. I'm good to my
oh
family. I'm
yeah,
good to my
yeah.
friends, right? So it's like, that just becomes another, well, you're screwing this person. And, I mean, we've all done it. I've done it, right? I mean,
Oh,
we
yeah.
all just, to get along in the society, I think there's just some level of like, we all have to do a little bit of this just to sort of like, if we're going to not live in dire poverty, it's sort of
Yeah.
just, so, that becomes a discussion in, the 12-step circles that I run in that deal with money issues. Essentially it's like, when are we extraordinarily honest, and when, and if I were a purist in the 12-step model, be honest all the time because, higher power is going to take care of it, and I have to say, there have been moments where I've done that and it's like, oh my God, wow, like it actually worked out in some other way that I didn't expect, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and then there's other moments where it's just like, really, this is just so much work and it's so painful. And, so, we're always kind of up against that, in the society that we live in.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a paradox almost, you
Yeah.
know, because you on one hand you want society to take care of you, and you want to do the best for society, but on another hand you're looking out for individualism, and
Hmm.
it's dog eat dog. It's like,
Yeah. Well, I think there was an interesting study that was done, maybe, again, it's like, I saw this some years ago as I was doing some research for something online, and they were talking about, it was some article talking about, trust level. And this is actually very central to the video work that I do. It's like, for instance, the trauma load video, if you've seen that one.
oh yeah,
Really, like, one of the measures is, which I don't discuss in that video, but it's very, very correlated, this idea of trust. How like, how much do we trust each other as in general in society? And there have been studies that have been done where they've looked at different societies, like, for instance, China, or some countries in the Middle East, the United States, European countries, Scandinavia. They've done like different regions, different countries of the world, different
yeah,
cultures, and they seem to, this particular study that I remember seems to have correlated. They would ask, I can't remember if it was one question, two questions, three questions, but essentially the questions had this sort of flavor of, how likely are you to trust a random stranger, something to that effect. If you were
okay,
just in
yeah,
your normal life going about and some random stranger said something, did something, how much would you trust
uh,
them? And the difference was, I think the highest was China, or maybe Japan. It was like, either China or Japan, maybe both were pretty high, like in the 70% range.
Wow.
And I don't remember specifically, but Europe, like Northern Europe, Scandinavia, was pretty high. Might have been in the 50s or 60s, something like that. And they've also been tracking this over time, right? So on the other extreme was, if I remember correctly, they were looking at Islamic countries. It might have been like Iraq or Iran. I don't know if it was Iran. I think it was Iraq, or maybe it was Syria or Saudi Arabia. And on that was kind of the other extreme end. It was like, it was generally something like 20%, 20, maybe approaching 30, but it was
troubling.
Way on the other extreme.
Yeah.
And then they said the United States was, if I remember correctly, it was like the United States was a little bit higher than the Middle Eastern countries they looked at. It was like the United States, if the Islamic world was in the low 20s, the United States was maybe high 20s.
I mean, I'm not surprised we're at the low end of it,
Right. Well, what they correlated, though, which was very interesting in the study, it was they discovered that there seemed to be a correlation between the level of prosperity in the society, and the level of essentially material prosperity versus the level of trust. And what they seemed to find was that the more trust there was in society, the richer the population was.
Or was going towards, right?
Was moving toward, yeah. But was, and they said the one exception seemed to be the United States. And they were theorizing, well, United States is on the extreme low end. And yet the United States is the highest, per capita, and we're the wealthiest, everybody's the richest, whatever.
Yeah.
And they said, well, why is that? And there was sort of this openness in the scientific context of like, well, we don't really know, maybe there's other factors at play, but they said, very strong hypothesis seems to be that it has to do with the United States being the way the United States formed. So essentially, the fact that it was only 200-ish years ago that the white settlers came to North America, and because of the diseases that we all know, wiped out all the Native Americans or most of them, and the settlers just had access to so many resources in this continent that had essentially been ecologically developed by these other people, to this high level of ecological function. And they sort of found themselves in so the theory is that if the trust level in the United States stays at where it's at, we're eventually going to start approaching the norm, and we're going to end up being a very poor country. And I have to say, looking at the general trajectory I've seen, is it does seem to be going that way, right? That it's getting harder to make ends meet for everybody.
And that's because of austerity mainly, but yeah.
Yeah, but the austerity is part of the trust, part of the trust issues. It's like this, it kind of comes back to what I was talking, what I'm talking about in the COVID videos, where it's like, do we trust, if there's a mentality of fuck them all, I'm going to get mine, then you end up with this inability to cooperate, and people just stealing from each other and ultimately destroying, right? Whereas if and it becomes this dynamic of, ever greater inequality around power, and, it's money, but it's not even really money, it's power, right? Where on the other end, if there's this collective sense of, camaraderie, collective working together, collaboration, and there's sort of this realization of like, people
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that last sentence? I think.
power because, we entrusted them with something. But the only reason we have power, the only reason people have any power, I mean political power or, other forms of power really, is because we've essentially, at some level, we entrusted them with that power, right?
Yeah.
It's like it serves me to give up a little bit of freedom, because we're all essentially sovereign free people, but we kind of agree to, and I'm going to let somebody else make the laws because I don't have the bandwidth to like figure all that out by myself. So let's all agree to, let this person do that. We're going to trust them to do it. And
that's their job or whatever.
Yeah, we're going to hold them accountable. Right. But that's, where we're at is it's that same idea of like, just like the insurance companies, it's all breaking down because, there's this lack of trust, and my sense of it is I think the lack of trust really boils down to, a lot of it can be traced back to the worldview, that we're born into, our society, this sort of Judeo-Christian, this very, a very particular interpretation of that tradition generally, where it's like, you're bad, you're sinful, you don't deserve, you're wrong, just by your very nature, and it trains us to live in fear, and so when that's the generative script, behind the society, it has us behave certain ways toward ourselves, toward each other.
Shockwaves.
Yeah, and it it's this sort of generative. It's like the DNA essentially, and until we change the DNA, it's going to keep generating that same reality. So yeah,
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that is deep.
Right.
So I mean, hopefully people can follow your YouTube channel and get more of these dives into
totally
philosophical, what would you say, perspectives, looks at current issues. So that once again, that is We Are Beloved. Beloved is spelled BELOV 3D, right? Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we will, if you have any links, if you have any, what's your Instagram channel? That's another one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Instagram. Oftentimes, I'm doing a lot of the experimental, like it's a little more freeform, because it's mostly pictures and short form stuff. So Instagram is also We Are Beloved, spelled the same way. So, but it's underscores, and so it's We underscore RARE underscore beloved, spelled the same way, BELO.
Whereas in the YouTube, it is all one word.
No, it's three separate. It's actually three.
It's spaced. It's spaced.
Yeah, it's We.
Okay, so underscore is for the Instagram, and then space for the YouTube.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And right now, those are the two primary things that I'm working. I'm not really. I do have a We Are Beloved on Twitter. I don't even really touch it. I'm a little bit.
SEO. Yeah. You got to have different sites. You got to have different things going on. You got to.
Yeah. Well, I just find. Yeah, I'm barely touching. I'm not even really doing Twitter right now. So it's been YouTube and Instagram have been the primary. I'm also on Facebook just as myself, but and that's kind of spilling over a bit. But yeah, the Instagram and the YouTube. Again, We Are Beloved. On YouTube, spaces between the words, and the last E is the number 3 in Beloved. And then on Instagram, also spelled exactly the same way, but underscores instead of spaces. So it's We underscore R underscore Beloved, and then Beloved spelled with the number 3, with the last E being the number 3.
Because that's how it works. I mean, you got it, because you can't do the spaces on Instagram. So
that's right. Yeah, you can only do the underscores.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you very much for your time. I very much enjoyed your perspectives on what we're going through right now, how it relates to the film, how it relates to your channel, how it relates to everything that, is our world right now. And I hope that, we come out in a utopia You
I
know,
hope so
and
too.
not
Working on it.
yeah, right. Doing our best out here.
Doing our best. Yeah. I think like little kids in 2070 are, might be watching this and going, boy, those guys had no idea what they were doing. Or they might be like, thank you.
Right? Who knows?
Who knows?
Just winging it. Thank you so
Right,
much for your
exactly.
time, Emma, and
You're
I
very
will
welcome.
talk to you. I will talk to you soon.
All right. So let me know, when the file gets posted and the whole thing. It actually probably would be great to get the file.
Okay, I can get you the file. That's cool.
I'm
And
not
it'll
gonna.
probably be at about. We'll probably be posting in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks because
Oh,
we
okay.
have
All right. So it'll be a
we have
little
so
while.
many
Okay.
backed up. Hopefully, this
Yeah.
is still relevant by the time that we're done. Because
I know, right?
by the time
It's
we're
like, what
done
else is gonna
posting it,
happen? What else could possibly go wrong?
Murder Hornets round 2.
All
All right. I'll catch you
right.
later. Thank you, Emma.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great,
Bye-bye.
great night. Bye.
You too.